Please welcome the President and CEO of Gap Inc., Art Peck.
So they told me my job standing here was to share a bit about this company. 135,000 employees, $16 billion in revenue, about 4,000 stores around the world, almost $4 billion e-commerce platform, $1 billion a year spent on technology and innovation, and 50 years of history in 20 minutes. I promise to do my best. Let me take you, though, before I do that, back in time. And I want to take you to 1944, when Congress passed the Servicemen's Readjustment Act of 1944, which is also known as the GI Bill. And why am I taking you back in time, other than it's perhaps the last time that Congress passed a meaningful bipartisan piece of legislation? But I'm taking you back in time because this piece of legislation gave birth to the retail as we know it today, and the retail really of the second half of the 20th century. And why is that the case? Because two meaningful things happened in this legislation. Returning servicemen from World War II were given subsidized tuition for higher education, and mortgages were subsidized, zero down payment and zero interest. And the net of that was a chain of events that created retail as we know it today. Number one, people became more educated, had higher paying jobs, they could afford to buy houses, they had mortgages that allowed them to. They pivoted from being a renting society to a homeowning society when there wasn't housing stock to buy, so they moved to what then became the suburbs. When they moved to the suburbs, retail left Main Street downtown and moved onto cheap land into big boxes called malls. And the first mall was built in 1956. Importantly, the last enclosed regional mall was built in 2006. Our founders, Don and Doris Fisher, caught the wave of mall construction and suburban expansion and the creation of the middle class in the United States, and rode what was a perfect wave for almost 50 years. But Gap Inc., when it was founded, was based on a simple principle of innovation and rejecting compromise. And the idea that Don and Doris had started from a very simple place, which oftentimes retail does. Don was tall, well over 6 feet. He couldn't find jeans that fit in a normal assortment, so they founded a store, rejecting the compromise of selection and satisfaction, and creating what was first called pants and discs. Thankfully, Gap stuck, that didn't, or I might not be here today. But lightning in retailers oftentimes doesn't strike more than once. In Gap Inc., lightning struck not once, but twice and many times. And in 1994, Old Navy was created, and again, compromise was rejected. And again, a very simple, straightforward idea. Shopping for value clothes for the family was kind of a lousy experience. And so Old Navy was founded on a simple principle of fun, family, fashion, and value. And it sounds obvious, but is the fastest retail concept to $1 billion ever. And closing in on $8 billion today with a path towards 10 and a ramp well beyond that, it was an amazing concept. And then lightning struck again as we moved to the web, one of the earliest movers with our very sophisticated e-commerce representation in front of me, which has morphed into what is today the biggest universal apparel platform and marketplace that exists in the industry. Addressing compromise, experimenting, and innovation has been in the DNA of the company since the company began. And many things, frankly, and I'll just give you a little peek, that you've never heard of. So the first 1969, the first Gap store, we had a business called Pants Off. That didn't last long. We formed a franchise division in 2006, which was pretty radical and novel for the apparel industry at the time, now doing business in 35 countries with roughly 500 stores around the world. The Universal website in 2006. Our first stores as an early mover in China in 2010. Just this last year, we founded Hill City And today, we announced the 7th brand in the portfolio, taking advantage, but getting a great business, of the disruption that's going on in retail by buying Janie and Jack, which is an incredible jewel box of a business out of the Gymboree catastrophic nightmare bankruptcy meltdown. So, I suspect all of you may have seen the announcement that I made last week. A conscious uncoupling, I was told to call it, of separating the company into what we believe will be 2 thriving, successful retailers. There's a very simple reason for doing this, and the simple reason is, again, compromise. We spend $1 billion a year on technology, on capabilities, on infrastructure, on logistics. And it was increasingly becoming clear that the compromise that was required to meet the Old Navy as a value business and the specialty brands portfolio all the way up to Intermix as a specialty business, that the compromise was yielding a lack of focus and a lack of precision in our investments. And so the decision recognized the changes going on in retail will be 12 to 18 months of making this happen. We do believe that we will have 2 companies that are stronger than ever, and I would say watch this space. I think there's some very interesting things to come. So let me talk a little bit about where we are today and the future of what sits in front of us and where we're putting our energy and our effort. And again, against a backdrop of now 7 brands, 135,000 employees, a global footprint, and $16 billion in revenue. I see 4 compromises that are critical to us, and I believe critical to the industry to reject. Number 1, we have fundamentally a converged customer. The customer has moved beyond an omni-aspiration or whatever else you want to put against it, and is behaving in a converged way today, and yet we continue to shove the customer into a diverged set of channels and experiences. Number 2, access. Foundational to retail, we don't really talk about it. I want to talk about it. Number 3, service. Again, foundational to retail and in very scarce supply in most retailers today. And finally, maybe one that's a bit out of the blue, maybe a bit orthogonal to your thinking, our planet. Let me address all 4. First, converged customers versus diverged experience. We came, and most retailers did, from a place of physical stores, a pool of inventory spread across all the stores. We added an e-commerce business with a separate pool of inventory. We forced the customer to think channel versus brand and brand engagement. We took an incredibly important step, which seems trivial, was really hard and really important a few years ago. And I could go on and on about this one, but I just want to illustrate the importance of the benefit to the customers and the benefit to our economics. And what that step was to have real-time, well, with 15-second latency, of every unit of inventory that we have in the system available and presented in front of our customers. For the customer, that provides incredible selection. Every single unit in a store, whether it's in our DCs, shows up in the great store in the sky on our website, and she can shop it seamlessly. She never knows whether it came out of Minnesota or our DC in Ohio or a DC in California or a store at the border in San Diego. Why is that important? Because she can shop us seamlessly, frictionlessly, and has access to all that we have. Why does it matter for our economics? When you spread inventory across almost 4,000 stores, by definition, you have wrong inventory in the wrong place at the wrong time. And by definition, the way that manifests itself in our business, it's called markdown and clearance. The demand's over here, the supply's over here, the 2 don't meet. What this allows us to do is to connect the highest quality demand with the lowest yield inventory and gives us a margin and a yield opportunity. Think of sucking out inventory like a vacuum cleaner out of a store that was over-allocated against full price demand online, and that's what the convergence in the experience of our economics means. Again, I could talk a lot more about that. We've really built our technology to be a bit like the apocryphal dorm in the college, where they built the dorm, didn't pave any sidewalks, and then they finally paved the paths that students wore in the grass. We did this because the customer's creating their experiences. Number 2, the conversation around access usually starts with the digital experience. web, app, tablet, page loads times, etc. I'm going to talk about the less sexy part of it, although making money for me is pretty sexy, and that is the 80% of apparel purchases that happen in stores. Why? Because I just closed 230 Gap stores. We announced that last week. In the last 9 years, 12,000 retail stores have closed in the United States. So that, of course, means that stores are irrelevant, stores don't mean anything, and we're screwed because we have all these stores, which of course isn't true because 80% of purchases still happens in stores. When I close 230 stores, it's because it's the wrong stores in the wrong locations. I want to talk about the right stores in the right locations. And the compromise here that we're breaking is the fact that there are great brands like some of ours where she doesn't have access to a convenient, respectful retail experience. Let me take you through 2 examples. Old Navy. You may not know this, it's the #2 apparel brand in the United States. The #2 apparel brand in the United States. 1,100 stores in North America, and there are many communities, we believe a significant portion of the population that should be shopping at an Old Navy that doesn't have access. What about online, you say? A significant percentage of our transactions for Old Navy are customers that don't have credit or don't have adequate credit to shop online. That is a meaningful thing in the world in which we do business. We have a prototype for a rural store, a small community store, an infill urban store, an infill suburban store, an ex-urban store, which we believe gives us a significant growth ramp in front of this business for a long time to come to bring the brand to every customer that wants to shop the brand. Okay, that's the old-fashioned way. You're building boxes and you're putting inventory in them, but 80% of apparel purchases continue to go through stores. Now let me come back to Gap, and here's the super cool thing about this, and I'm not talking about this, frankly, with anybody, but I'll share a little bit with you. We are building new Gap stores. Just as we've closed some from a fleet that is 50 years old, we are building new Gap stores. But in doing that, we're basically taking the historical model for specialty apparel and turning it inside out and upside down. Historical model was build a mall, tons of traffic, expensive rent, you make it up in low conversion but highly productive traffic. The secret of the industry today is the traffic in many of these malls is not nearly as productive as it once was, and the formula doesn't work. So we've used a pretty sophisticated tool to what I call inserting a store into her life. And I just opened a store in Encinitas, California, north of San Diego. It's the antithesis of a suburban enclosed mall. It's right next to a $50 million Trader Joe's, and the basic economic model and the customer service model is give her a store for her and insert it into her journey and her life. And this is a store where it has low traffic, low rent, properly sized, and we run it today, and it's a handful of several that look just like this, at conversion that is 2 to 2.5 times what we would run a store in a mall. The 4-wall model is beautiful, and most importantly, this was a customer comment. I haven't been to a Gap store in 10 years, but I'm coming here, and I've come here 3 times a week. Why? Because I don't want to get on Interstate 5, drive to the mall, pay for parking, deal with the hassle, but this way Gap has become part of my life again. It's a simple example, but with 12,000 stores closing in our industry where 80% again is bought in stores, we see access through physical stores complemented by a digital experience as a huge opportunity. Okay, I'm going to do a shameless plug here for our new brand, Hill City. Hill City was launched last year out of compromise as well. And I'm doing this because many of you in the room are the target customer for this brand. And what Hill City is it brings all the innovation in active and performance apparel to real clothes that you wear every day. I was in the airport the other day, and I swear to God, 50 yards away, I heard him coming, dressed comfortably, but his pants were so techy and crunchy that I could hear him from about 50 yards away. What Hill City is the best of active and the best of performance for your life every day. HillCity.com, I encourage you to go take a look. Digitally native, launched with a team of 20, 6 months, and we basically had it up and running, and we're super excited about the potential. Now let me finish. Third compromise I talked about was service. Service is missing in many stores today. But think about this. The traffic in a store today is the most intentional it's ever been since the beginning of the web. Why? You don't have to be in a store. It's kind of obvious. And yet we're an industry that celebrates when 70% of our customers leave the store empty-handed. There's plenty of traffic. There's not plenty of conversion. Why? Back to the basics. She can't find her size or her color. She doesn't know what top looks good with the jeans that she's going to buy. The checkout line is a mess and she dumps and runs. She can't get into the fitting room because there are too many people there. And so the one thing she really came into a store to do, she can't do. And maybe we just don't have the trend product because we've sold through. All the basic reasons, and these are all the top reasons why customers don't purchase in our stores and other stores as well. So, traditional industry response, throw inventory at it. It's not happening these days. And throw payroll at it. Also not happening these days. And this is where we're just scratching the surface. But what we're doing here, to me, is super cool and ultimately game-changing, which is bringing big data and analytics to bear on the customer experience, and the service proposition in the stores. It starts with a longitudinal view of the customer. Who is she? Who's your best customer? What do they buy? How do they shop? How frequently do they shop? What's their family composition, et cetera? It's connected to a personalized digital and in-store experience, what I call the digital shopkeeper. It morphs into localized assortments that customize the assortment for that store, not just on hot store, cold store, but size curves, aesthetic, the entire population, demographics, psychographics, et cetera. And it builds in predictive demand at the style and CC levels. That to me is a game changer, and it fundamentally changes the service that we deliver in our stores. We're scratching the surface, but if you're not doing this year, next year, and 5 years from now, you won't be around. Let me go to one last thing which connects to this, which is the last compromise, which is the planet. The apparel and textile industry is the second most polluting industry on the planet. There's almost zero recycling post-consumer. And let me just illustrate how sad it can be. So go back into the clearance section in anybody's store, and there may be a ditzy print polyester blouse hanging there. That blouse started by pumping oil someplace. The feedstock then was extruded into fiber. The fiber probably went to India to be woven into fabric. The fabric went to Vietnam to be cut and sewn and dyed and washed, packaged to a dock, on a ship, in a container, to a port, on a train, to a DC, on a truck, to the back of our store, only to hang in the back of a store unwanted. The secret of our industry that nobody talks about is really the fact that our supply chain is based upon too much time and too little data. Last year, Athleta was certified as a B Corp. It's not easy to do. Hill City launched from the get-go as a certified B Corp. And a big part of the platform for both of those businesses was what I call radical responsiveness. Athleta, when we bought the business, was on a 60 product pipeline. Today, a good portion of their business is 10 weeks or less, with 4 of those weeks being on vessel from Asia to the United States. That's a step forward. I aspire to this company leading, and it's a huge compromise that we need to reject, that you can't have fashion and behave responsibly. Okay, I'll finish. This is our 50th birthday. It's a long time. Most retailers have burned hot and burned out by 50 years. We're going to our second half century strong, with strong brands, loyal customers, now 7 in the portfolio, and we're excited about the prospects. But it's based on a platform of 3 simple words that our founder, Don Fisher, said very frequently and left us with: change or fail. Thank you very much.